A drawing demo of a tree can change how you draw. That might sound a bit of a big statement. Let me explain why I believe this is absolutely true. And the first part of the equation is the fact that when we start to learn to draw, we often have an oversimplified understanding of what we're doing. It's a natural way of thinking, and it's certainly no one's fault because it really is an extension of how we've drawn as a child. We see things and we copy them. And often the things we draw as a child are cartoon. They're cartoon characters. It certainly was that case for me. Or it's figures from a comic. Or if we're drawing from photos, they're usually fairly simplified things that we can reduce to outline relatively easily. And so when perhaps as an older young person or as a young adult or as an adult, we start to draw in our mind more seriously with higher expectations and greater hopes for what we can achieve, we can get very frustrated when we really can't go beyond drawings that end up looking a bit childlike, a bit cartoonish, a bit awkward, when we can't seem to inject a sense of realism. And the problem, I think, is that the idea of copying what we see works well for very simplified or cartoon comic-like references, to being inadequate for most real-life situations. Or I believe a better way of understanding, and I'm not saying this is the only way of understanding, but a far better way of understanding is to think of what we're doing when we draw as we're translating from one visual language, a photo or perhaps in real life, to a different visual language, which is, in my case, black ink marks on the paper. Now, a translation is always an interpretation. The thing about a translation is that sometimes when we change something from one language to another, we can say it pretty much the same, just change word for word, but quite identifiable. Sometimes we have to say something totally differently, different grammar, different phrasing, different idioms to say the same thing. So, because it's the meaning that's important, not the actual structure so much. And if we can't use that original language structure in our language that we're using to translate, then we need to find the best parallel in that new language. And if we think of the language as being what I'm putting on the right-hand side of this now, a tree is, I think, the easiest example to see, to understand this idea that we're actually looking visually at one language and trying to find a different way of expressing it. Because a tree is made up of so much detail that we can't possibly draw it. Now, we can look at this large tree and see that it's made up of lots and lots and lots and lots of leaves. And if we look hard, we can, we feel like we can see the leaves. If the leaves are rather large on this tree, which I think they might be, then we can actually make out individual leaves, but we can't possibly draw them. And this because there's just too many leaves. And this is why the idea of copying shapes obviously doesn't work for almost every tree we go to draw. There's just too many shapes of leaves. And this is why trying to draw a tree can be overwhelming for beginners, because you can't just copy it. Clearly can't just copy it. And so what do? And without a way of understanding the process of drawing, we often just revert to making leafy patterns or leaf symbols, which don't translate well. And so we're not happy. We haven't said this in our new ink language in a way that has a sense of realism to it. And so what we have to do is we have to find marks that will create the effect of what we're seeing. I'm not trying to copy the exactness of the detail, which in this case is leaves. I'm trying to find marks that capture the effect of it. Now, if we look at what I've drawn, if we just switch from this more conceptual thinking to the actual demo that's taking place, and let me say you're seeing this at double speed. So if you want to watch the drawing at real drawing time, use that cog icon and reduce the video to half speed, although my voice will drop a bit and take twice as long to say the same thing. But if we have a look at what I'm drawing now. Notice, for instance, that I haven't drawn an outline around the top of the tree canopy because I don't think those marks visually will say what we want to say about the top of the tree. A heavy outline, firstly, will look very flat and two-dimensional. And secondly, there is a massive little detail there, and the light catches it in different ways. Some of the very uppermost silhouette leaves are in light and some are in darkness, are in shade or shadow, and that creates a different effect. So this is 10 minutes into the drawing. And I feel like a lightly dotted and dashed line, particularly on the part of the canopy that's getting the most sunlight, more accurately translates, more accurately says, in a different way, but a similar way, what we see visually in the reference, particularly when combined with the other marks I'm going to use to interpret other parts of this scene. Is that making sense? Please hit the like button for me if you're finding this helpful, interesting. That would be a great help for me. So this is an excellent example of not trying to draw a copy of the tree, but to capture the effect of the tree by interpreting the visual picture, the photo, by translating that into marks on the paper. And if you look now, you can see what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. You'll notice, for instance, that I started with the canopy and I'm working down because I personally find that gives me a far better chance of having the tree all look in proportion. I find that if I start at the bottom with the trunk and work up, which is very common, I find the trunk almost always is too fat and that there isn't room for the branches to get thinner as I go up. And I also find that it's easy for the branches to be too thick as they go up to the very edge of the tree canopy, and they have to have disappeared into fine twigs by the time they get to the edge of the leaf canopy. Whereas if I start in the center or at the top and work down, I can make the branches that we see the width they need to be based on my reference, and then it's easier to then thicken them to the right thickness as they go down. And I always err on the side of making the trunks and the lower branches too thin because it's easy enough to make them slightly thicker, particularly when they're a dark value, as is the case here. So what I'm doing instead of focusing on leaves, which is the more literal way, or the more childlike way of trying to draw a tree, trying to draw the leaves, I'm focusing on the canopy as a whole and working out what marks can I use to draw the canopy as a whole. Can you see how the way I understand the process of drawing actually guides me? It makes drawing this tree far more possible. And it's exactly the same principle I use when I draw anything, not just a tree. It doesn't matter whether it's a sandstone cottage or whether it's cars on a street or a crowd of people. I'm always looking at the overall effect and thinking, what marks will I use to capture how this looks? And the marks I use for the same thing, such as say a tree, will change if the tree is close or if it's far away, even if it's the same type of tree. If I draw a crowd of people, I will draw the closest people in a different way to the ones a bit further back or right far in the distance, because the way they look is different depending how close or far they are. So I need to find marks that are appropriate to capture those objects, to translate the photo into, so that the feel is correct. And one of the deceits, if you like, of a photo is that it gives us far more detail than we see in life. A camera lens captures everything that it can see in far more detail than we're going to get in real life. In real life, I would see all of this detail, but only if I were looking at each part of this tree and this scene bit by bit. As I move my eyes around the entire scene intensely, I would see all of this. But in life, I look at one point, one focus, and I create a more realistic effect when I translate this scene, this photo, into marks on the paper, if I have one focal point that feels more intense, that feels more detail, that has more attention shown to it in the number of marks I make and the care with which I blend them together, and therefore the clarity with which I say something using those marks. And so that's what I'm trying to do. You see me now, I'm establishing the base of this tree. And notice I'm also doing my hatching lines horizontally, going across the branches, not running parallel to them. I find this creates a nice contrast between the larger branches, at least, the trunks, and the generally vertical hatching for the leaf canopy. As I was saying before, and hatching is all about, one of the 10 ways I use hatching is to create clarity between different things. So we're 20 minutes into the drawing now in real time, and this is a 0.3 millimeter Copic fine liner pen that I'm using. So another important thing when we draw, and again this can be different, is to not look at each part of the photo and seek to copy that, but to always be considering the overall drawing that I'm doing. Because the photo is the photo, and it has some strengths that I can't copy, but it has some weaknesses that I can overcome. And the flatness that a camera gives, because it gives all the detail and all the values, but makes them look as if they were all close together, because we don't get the sense of distance. We don't get the sense of, we're not seeing the further away things as clearly as we're seeing the part that we're focused on. We can put into our scene that sense of distance that the camera has left out. And so we need to interpret our photo in a way to put those effects in as well, because the sense of distance is an effect that I can create by using my marks carefully, by choosing a good translation, if you like, of the marks I use and the ways I use them. And there are many different drawing languages. There are as many different drawing languages as there are people holding pens and pencils and things in their hands. So there's no right way. I'm not saying this is the only way to interpret a scene. Not at all. This is the way I've developed doing it, and I'm getting the sorts of results I'm wanting to get. But there are many, many ways, and each of these ways creates a different drawing style as well. And so one of the things that's important is not to get caught up doing all the work in any one part, but to get the overall scope of the scene drawn. You know, I'm not saying we can't do some detail, but then to do all the final adjustments once we've got the bulk of it done. Start to work out exactly how dark are the darks going to be. And particularly for a tree canopy, that's important, because the canopy, I talked before about, we need to see it as not leaves, but as one canopy. And so the canopy becomes this basically kind of like ball-shaped thing. Some trees more ball-shaped than others, and some trees more a collection of balls or ovoids and things that are linked by branches, and there's blue sky between them. But however the canopies work on a particular tree, we need to see them as these shapes. So if this particular tree, if we look at the center, down the bottom, we see there's one large clump there. And if we go upwards, we can see there's roughly another large clump there, and then at the top, there's another section. And if we go left and right, we can see some more clumps. Now, if we were to view from another angle, then we'd probably see some parts more clearly. So if we look at the upper half of the tree, right in the center of that, like a bullseye, we can see there's a round, lighter group of leaves. Now, that, from my understanding of trees and of Australian trees, that's going to be a branch that's coming out directly at us. So that's probably the closest part, or maybe it's the clump coming out underneath. But that's going to be closer to us than all the ring around it. And so I can try and create an effect of that in my drawing that I don't see in the photo. And this is where really observing our reference and having a plan for what we're drawing to translate is so important. When I think that what I'm doing is just copying, then I just start to copy because I think it's going to be the same all over. I just try and draw it as exactly as is in the photo, whatever part. So it doesn't really matter what I draw where. Whereas if I'm translating into a drawing, if I'm translating my photo into a drawing, there's far more creative choice. Of necessity, there's far more creative choice. So I need to think more and plan more what's going to work best. And so this is where starting to understand our process guides us. How do I know what marks to put on the paper? Well, I work out the way I'm going to translate this scene. And if you've seen many of my videos, you'll know that I do experimental marks on a scrap of paper to see if I'm going to create the effects I think I'm going to create with the marks I'm thinking will translate the effect that I see in the photo. And it gives me a chance to see if that's right or not, to see if it's helpful or not. I find that that's really important. Please hit that like button if you haven't done it already for me. Because we often, again, when we're beginners, we think that the important thing is learning techniques. Somehow there's a learning to hatch way and being able to draw a straight line freehand and circles and curves freehand. Well, yeah, all those things are helpful. But the techniques, the actual ability to move a pen in a controlled way and get a line or a mark or a dot or a circle that we want, 30 minutes now, real time, to get those, it's easy to think that that's what I need to do to draw. And when I'm understanding that drawing is copying, well, that makes sense because I just need to be able to draw the curves or the lines or the outlines that I see in the reference. But when I start to realize that drawing is translating, then the hard part, the challenge, is understanding how I'm going to translate. That's the hard part. It's not so much, we often do need to practice skills and learn them. I'm not saying there's no benefit in that. But when we've done that, then we're ready for the truly tricky part, which is working out what marks we're going to use when and how. And if you don't know really, if you feel lost holding the pen, looking at the photo, knowing what marks to put on the paper, it's going to be because you haven't been able to yet develop an understanding of the drawing process. So many of my more recent videos really hammer home, really talk about the drawing process, what it could be, but definitely encouraging you to develop one over time yourself, because in a sense my drawing process is in the end what I find works for me. And you can see here now I'm starting to concentrate in this drawing of the tree with darker values in the darkest parts, because now I'm trying to make some adjustments that will give a sense of the overall lights and darks. Because while I'm drawing particular lights and darks to represent particular parts, I'm also every now and then pausing and looking at the overall tree, and I'm looking at the photo, the reference overall, and I'm reminding myself it's not just a lot of little parts, but overall it's this sort of roundish shape, and the light's coming from a certain direction, which means there's more light hitting it in certain parts than others. There's more shade in certain parts than others, and there's even shadow, which is darker again in other parts. And so I want to keep those relative values from the lightest parts of the tree to the darkest parts of the tree in my drawing relative to what's happening in the photo. I want to make sure that I don't lose the overall proportions of lights and darks that create this rounded ball shape. In fact, I want to create it more in my drawing than we see in the photo, which does, as I said before, tend to flatten the effect of these things. I want to make my drawing look rounder than the photo. But it's having an understanding of my translation process, that this is what I do. I'm translating the effect that gets me now thinking, what is the effect that I see when I look at this? Visually, what are the shapes, the colours, the blobs, the hard edges, the values, whatever? What is it I'm seeing, and what marks can I put on the paper using this 0.3mm pen to create that look? Not by copying necessarily, but what marks can I put on that will help create that? You see, if you look at those horizontal marks for the hatching of the trunk, I'm not sure you'd get that by looking at what I'm actually doing. If you look at the actual tree trunk, I don't think you'd see horizontal lines there. And yet, in my mind, that reads well in the drawing. It lets us interpret what we're seeing and somehow have a realistic effect. And I've discovered that by trying it out in lots of drawings. And there are things I've tried out that I've never tried out more than once. And there are some things that I might sometimes use under some circumstances. This is what we do. We build up our understanding of the words we have in our new drawing language with our pens, and we work out the best ways, the best places when we can use those words, if you like, and how we combine them to say something. And you'll see that I'm now doing the same thing with the ground. I'm interpreting what I see in the photo, and I'm trying to find marks to create that same effect in my drawing. I'm not trying to draw grass, I'm trying to draw this jagged capture of light that goes down the front where the grass is in the sunlight. And then behind it, we have the silhouette of that grass made very bold because of the shade and the shadows behind it. And also the grass in the front creates a different look to the grass further back. And again, that's something I'm going to want to, if possible, find marks to capture. But I can't possibly draw the individual blades of grass. And if I did, it wouldn't look like how it looks in the scene if I look at this grass that's really close. I actually can't draw that by drawing those because they're basically light on dark. And my tool is dark on light. And so I have to interpret that. I have to find another way of coming at it to create the effect. Hope this is making sense because, as I said, this is the crossover, if you like, from the thinking that we have when we're beginners, that I'm just copying what I see, and a more mature way of viewing it, which actually sets us up now for developing an understanding of our drawing process and creating our drawing style, and also having a framework that will let me draw anything at all. Now, I said earlier that this is such a good demo to explain all this because I think trees, most obviously, we can't draw the detail. We have to draw the effect. And therefore, I have to change from a simplistic I'm copying leaves to a more sophisticated, no, I'm having to draw the effect of all the leaves. Or the same principle with the grass as well. I'm not drawing the individual blades of grass. I'm creating the effect of all the grass together. And once we've grasped it with trees and grass, if we keep thinking about it, we realize that 40 minutes, we start to realize that in fact, this is what I need to do with everything I see in my reference or in life when I draw. I'm always interpreting. I'm always translating from a either visual reality language or from a photographic language into the language of black ink, in this case, on paper. If I'm using watercolor, it's a different language. If I'm drawing with pencil, it's a different language because I can create different effects with graphite, which I can smudge as well as create lines with. And in some ways, I have greater variety of value I can create with the one instrument merely by shifting how I hold it, how much pressure I use, how sharp the edge is, and so forth. And of course, with pens, I can increase the flexibility of my language by using other pens, thinner pens, thicker pens. And so in a sense, I have as many marks I can use as I want to use. And these become now tools I have. See, I think of all these techniques that we use in drawing, the actual ink on paper skills that we might need and effects that we can create from hatching and things. I think of these as tools in our toolbox. Now we can't make our drawing without using the tools, so we need to have the tools. We need to have some practice and refinement and understanding of the techniques that we have. But the tools don't tell us what we're making. The tools don't tell us what we're going to draw. We have to know what we're making before we start to make it, and then we choose the most appropriate tools. And that's what I'm saying we need to do. We need to work out in our mind, from our understanding of our drawing process, what we're trying to do, and then we can start to plan, well, what tools do I think I'll use? And that's, as I mentioned earlier, where I get the scrap of paper and I start to play around with marks and effects and see what effects do I create I can create that might be useful in this drawing. The tools don't tell me what to do. I pick up the tools to do the things I've worked out that I need to do or I'm going to want to do for my drawing. And so now I'm really just doing those final adjustments. I'm looking very much big picture and thinking, where do I want the lights to be lighter and the darks to be darker? Where will a little more contrast help what I'm trying to do? And can I also say it's just as important that we put just as much effort into what I think of as the support acts, not the main subject. In this case, it's going to be the shadow under the tree and that foreground grass. I need to apply my translation skills just as carefully for all the parts of the scene, regardless of how much ink and how much line work it's going to take to do them. So, you're going to have a go. You're going to draw this tree and see if it doesn't help you understand the whole idea of the drawing process, not as copying, but of translating from one visual language into another, and of trying to see the overall effect in our reference or in life, and translate that effect using whatever marks are the best marks we can use with whatever medium we're using. For me, this has absolutely revolutionized and transformed my drawing. And the more I develop this way of thinking, I have found the easier it becomes to draw that in ways that I think achieve what I'm hoping to achieve when I draw. And that I can apply this really quite easily to subjects I'm not familiar with, having really refined my understanding and practice of it in a limited number of subjects: trees, architecture, streetscapes, and so forth. I find now it's a pretty solid foundation for anything I want to translate at all. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you find this as helpful as I found it. But in the end, whatever you draw, however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.